One day, how I got to meet the children, I came back from Berlin to Rhein-Main about the middle of the day, at noon. Beautiful weather. I was supposed to go to bed right then, so I start flying that night. But I had my movie camera, and I had a friend in Berlin that had a Jeep and a driver. And he said, if you get to Berlin, and when we land in Berlin, we just stand there and take off immediately. We couldn't do anything. Couldn't even go in the building, internal building. Turn around and go leave. So we couldn't do anything. So he said, you get here, you can take my driver and go around and take pictures of the destruction. So I thought, here's a good day. This was only the 17th of July, 1948, just started. And I said, I'm going to Berlin. My buddy had an airplane next door, ready to go, with dried egg, potatoes. And I got in the airplane. My co-pilot says, go to bed tonight. I'll be back before we have to fly. I go to bed now, and I'll be back. So I went to Berlin, and I didn't have to stay on the airbase, but I ran inside the airbase to the approach where the airplanes were coming over my head. Before I got the Jeep, I wanted to get pictures of airplanes coming over my head. And all of a sudden, on the other side of the wire, the fence around the field, I was inside, with 30 children staring at me right against the fence, looking at the uniform that was killing them a few years before. And they were friendly. Their aunts and uncles from East Berlin would come over to the library, use the library to find out what's going on. American-style freedom was their dream. Hitler's past was their nightmare. And Stalin's future was their nightmare. So they were friendly. For an hour, they talked to me in their school English. They learned it in school. I couldn't speak German. And they said, look, the weather's good in July, but when winter comes, you'll have trouble getting here. They said, when that happens, don't worry about us. Kids, 8 to 14 years old, don't worry about us. Same things their parents said. When that happens, we can live on thin rations, very few rations. But if we lose our freedom, we'll never get it back. The same thing. They said, don't worry about us. Just don't give up. And so I turned to leave. And then I suddenly realized not one of these children in an hour had put out their hand and said, give me chocolate, if you got chocolate. Not one. And in their voice didn't say, dummy, don't you know kids like chocolate? And when I realized that they were so grateful for flour to be free, to get freedom, they wouldn't ask for a small thing like chocolate. But they wanted, they didn't have any for years. And when I realized that, I said, I can't believe it. During the war and after, children like that in other countries would chase me. Give me chocolate, chocolate, even though they had chocolate. These kids had none, and not one said, give me. And that's a message for our young people. If you say, give me all the time, people hold you off. And if all I had was 2 sticks of gum. 30 kids, you'll have a fight, get out of here. And then the little voice said to me, go back to the fence. Go back to the fence with 2 sticks of gum and 30 kids and hope they don't fight. I went back to the fence, put it through to the children that were talking to me. Here came the rest of them. And they didn't fight. They wanted a piece of the paper on the gum, just a piece of paper like that. And they tore off the paper and gave the paper to the other children. And the children put paper up to their nose and smelled it, just the smell. And their eyes got big. And I couldn't believe it. I just took me apart. My heart just said, oh, those poor kids. And then an airplane flew over my head and landed behind me. I couldn't come back to the fence. I'd fly 24 hours without sleep. I couldn't come back, see him again. So I said, you come back tomorrow. Stand between the bombed out buildings and the fence. When I come into land, I'll throw out enough chocolate for all of you. You'll share it? Will you share it? Jawohl, jawohl, jawohl. We'll share it. Jumped up and down. And then they said, we got to know what airplane you're in. We can't see a little package. Every 3 minutes, an airplane. I said, I'll wiggle the wings. Wackelflugel. When you see the airplane, wiggle wings, that's got it. Get ready. And so the kid says, wow, get out of here. Went back to Berlin, Germany, West Germany that night, to Rhein-Main. I said, give me your ration. We could only buy a limit once a week. Give me your ration. I said, what are you going to do? Buy something on the black market? I said, no, I'm going to drop the kids. You got to have permission. You can't do that. I said, I'm going to do it. Give me your ration. They gave me the ration. Came back that night, of course, We wouldn't even try. Next day about noon, we came in over the field, it was clear, and there's those kids, right in the middle. They hadn't told anybody else. And I wiggled the wings, and they just went crazy. I dropped it out of the airplane, and when I taxied around takeoff, they were waving 3 parachutes. It was 3 parachutes to Barbara. I said, I wish they wouldn't do that because I didn't have permission. I didn't want to get caught. Well, next week we dropped more, and we dropped it for 3 weeks. And then a newspaper man in Berlin heard about it. He got a picture of my airplane, the tail, parachutes, put it all over the world. And when I came back from Berlin the next day to see my boss, he said, Halvorsen, what have you been doing? I said, flying like mad, sir. I'm not stupid, he said. Well, what else you been doing? Then he pulled out the newspaper, put it down there. There's my airplane, parachutes coming out of it. The general had called him and said, what are you doing dropping parachutes over Berlin? He says, General, we're not dropping parachutes over. You better wake up, Colonel, and find out what's going on in your outfit. Well, the general liked it. General Tenner says, it's okay, keep doing it. That's what happened. Because not one child put out their hand and said, give me. In the next 14 months, they got 23 tons of chocolate from the sky and on the ground. At Christmas time, we delivered almost 7 tons of chocolate on the ground with one drop. The children in America were tying all the parachutes for us. For all that 23 tons, they tied up all the parachutes. All we had to do was throw it out the window. We quit dropping it at the end of the runway because the crowd was too big. So we dropped it all over West Berlin. I even dropped it over East Berlin kids. I said, they wrote me a letter, said, look, we don't have any chocolate either. We're over at West Berlin catching the West Berlin kids' chocolate, but it's too crowded. So I started dropping over East Berlin. And I came back one day, and an officer met the airplane. Halvorsen, what are you doing over East Berlin? I said, well, here you go again. I said, I'm dropping parachutes to those poor communist kids. They don't have any either. You can't do that, he said. I said, the law of gravity is the same on both sides of the border. Not a problem. The Soviets complained to the State Department, it's a dirty capitalist trick. And you've got to stop. So I stopped. But years later, for 2 sticks of gum, I became the commander of Tempelhof for 4 years, just because I got into that. And I met many people from East Berlin then that could come out, and they told me about having caught the parachutes. So it's the children that are so wonderful. And they're the ones that get hurt the worst during the war.